and welcome to the 10th and final episode of Season 2 of God in Film, the podcast where a Christian and an atheist dive into the best that cinema has to offer and see if we can find any elements that have parallels with the Gospel or any other Bible stories. I'm Media Coordinator and Organ Grinder, Giles Goff.
And I'm Claims Negotiator and Dancing Monkey, Phil Coleman.
And during this time of lockdown, we'll be trying to stave off the desire to permanently volunteer at all vaccination centres by sticking on our Film Geek hats to analyse 2017's The Shack, starring Sam Worthington and based on the New York Times bestseller of the same name. We'll be looking at whether God is a woman, why our relationships with our dads get in the way of our relationship with God, does Jesus have a sense of humour, and why you shouldn't just go around accusing people of heresy willy-nilly. Now, before we started on this one, I knew we would need to take a bit more time than usual to prepare for this one. I knew that the film did not necessarily live up to the high standards set by the book. So I sent Phil a copy of the book, expecting him to skim through a few chapters. And to my surprise, he actually read the whole thing. So, Phil, what did you think of The Shack?
It's very, very uplifting. That was the first thing that I got from it. Is I like it's very bleak, and it has the subject matter it tackles, sort of like, you know, loss of a child and how a father deals with the grief of that and the supposed responsibility on his part, which he feels. It's quite poignant, and having just become a father for real this time, properly myself, I really sympathised with the man because there is just no greater pain, I imagine. What I enjoyed about the book is the fact that it sort of gives you hope that even if you make a few mistakes, like if you were a Christian or if you did believe in God, I can imagine reading this kind of book would be quite, maybe cathartic was probably the term.
Uplifting and cathartic is really good words to describe it. I remember reading this approximately 11 years ago. I remember that feeling of almost wishing it was real, wishing that it wasn't, that the story wasn't just fiction, because I felt like it said so much about what a relationship with God was like. It almost wasn't enough that it was fiction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think the thing that I got from it is just that it sort of dispelled a lot of the myths. Or at least, even though it's a piece of fiction, and as we'll probably discuss later, a lot of people did not agree with the universalist sort of viewpoint of the book.
Well, I'll tell you what, I learned the term universalism like last Thursday, so it sounds like you're pretty au fait with it. Do you want to tell people what universalism is?
From what I understand, I mean, I don't understand it that well, but what I do understand of it is that everybody is forgiven and accepted by God no matter what you do, and that you will be redeemed as long as you maintain a relationship with God. This is layman's terms for me. Like,
we're 22 episodes in and now you're explaining religious concepts to me. Anyway, without further ado, let's hear Phil's facts.
Full disclosure time, there was not many facts for this film that were completely obvious. Yeah, it's quite devoid this time around. So
Phil's fact.
The Shack is a 2017 American Christian drama film that's directed by Stuart Hazeldine, and it's based on the 2007 novel of the same name by William P. Young. So, in 2005, William P. Young was working 3 jobs and living in a 900 square foot apartment with his wife and 4 of his 6 children after losing his home to bankruptcy. He started writing a novel during his daily 14-minute train commute, hoping to express his feelings about God to his children, since he couldn't afford to buy holiday gifts. He expected his family, and maybe a few of his friends, to read it, and the book sold over 20 million copies, so I bet he was dead chuffed about that.
Yeah, right. His wife Kim asked him, the way you think is really quite interesting, and the way you think about God is really interesting. It would be nice if you could just write it down so that our children have something of the way your mind works on this stuff. So he goes, and he ends up writing The Shack, and she says, yeah, I was expecting like 5 or 6 pages. You know?
Yeah. That's pretty impressive.
I reckon she was more surprised than J.R.R. Tolkien's editor when he said, "It's great, we need a follow-up to The Hobbit." Here's Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, he's just there like, it's all good. Forrest Whitaker was originally attached to direct, but he dropped out.
That's a shame. I would have loved to have seen Forrest Whitaker's version of this.
So, Aviv Alush, who played Jesus, is the first Israeli actor to play Jesus in an English-language film.
That
Apparently
is insane.
So, yeah. I know, I thought that. I would have thought it would have been a bit more commonplace, because Jesus was Jewish, right? So,
yes,
Israel, Judaism.
Also, you've got to remember that for the last sort of 2,000 years, Jesus has been portrayed in pretty much every bit of Christian art as blonde hair, blue eyes, Caucasian sort of Jesus. So it's taken people a while to go, yeah, you know that Jesus was born in Israel and Israel's in the Middle East, right?
You do know how geography works, yeah. James B. DeYoung, a professor of New Testament language and literature at Western Seminary in Oregon, and the author of a scathing critique called Burning Down the Shack, How the Christian Bestseller is Deceiving Millions, said Young's message strays dangerously far from biblical teachings and promotes universalism, or the idea that in the end, all people will go to heaven.
So, have you ever heard this sort of term, the purists and the tourists?
I've not heard of it, but I think I can get a gist of what it means.
Yeah, so the general sort of idea is that when you're coming to an adaptation of something that already exists in some form, whether it's a historical epic or whether it's an adaptation of a book or something like that, you're going to have the purists who are there sort of looking at it going, well, that is not exactly the way it is portrayed in the book as I like it. And then you've got other people who just literally saw that this film was being advertised and they thought they'd take a punt on it. So what happens is that a lot of the time you can have a story that is not necessarily completely 100% accurate or completely 100% faithful to the source material, but it is engaging enough to hook people's interest in and have them want to find out more about it. It has been brought to my attention that not everybody goes, that's really interesting, I would like to research it further. Some people just go, that is a good film, and then they carry on with their lives. And frankly, I'll never understand those people.
Me either.
But if this film makes people want to learn more about God, then that is a good thing.
I think it is a good thing.
What's going to be interesting is when they make the film adaptation of our lives and get all the facts wrong there. Like, hang on, wait a second. In this version, Phil is taller than Giles.
Why is he being played by a digitally de-aged Danny DeVito? You know what I mean?
I mean, nobody expected Keira Knightley to play Giles, but, you know, she's got range, whatever.
I've got one more. Young initially printed just 15 copies of his book. Two of his close friends encouraged him to have it published and assisted with some editing and rewriting in order to prepare the manuscript for publication. And after rejection by 26 publishers, Young and his friends published the book under the name of their newly created publishing company, Windblown Media, in 2007. The company only spent $200 Canadian on advertising, and word-of-mouth referrals eventually drove the book to number 1 on the New York Times paperback fiction bestseller list in June 2008. It's quite nice to see that sort of like bankruptcy to bestseller sort of story, you know.
As rags to riches stories go, self-publishing a novel, which, let's be honest, there are some bits in it that a good editor would have definitely taken a red pen to.
All in all, mate, I did actually really like it, and it's obviously probably the most on-the-nose Christian film we've done so far.
I was going to say, this is a little bit of a diversion from our established format, because whilst we normally take things from mainstream cinema and then find the faith parallels in there, this time we've gone and we've picked a incredibly explicitly Christian film, because in quite simple terms, how could I not talk about this one? And
it's God in film, and it literally has God in the film. You know, so. Normally
we try to avoid this kind of thing because, frankly, I want to talk about things that nobody else is talking about. Everybody else has had something to say about the Shack, but I felt it had to be included in this, and it felt like such an important story that it needed to be the season 2 finale.
You know something, like the religious aspect of it isn't my thing. However, the sort of the idea of the reconciliation with his father and the idea that he gets to sort of forgive the killer of his daughter, it sort of aligns very much with how I would like to think I am in life. Mm-hmm. Like, if I allow grief and blame to sort of, like, you know, rule my life, which I have done in the past, then I'm just going to burn up inside, and it's no way to live. So I recognise the human qualities of it. I thought it was a joy to read and to watch.
Thank you for those facts, Phil. They were awesome. No now, our guest this week is someone who has had a brief stint on the podcast before, but we thought we'd bring him back for like a proper guest role. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, Giles. I'm Nick Matthews, working for Life Church in Manchester.
Nick, it is wonderful to have you back on the podcast again.
Good to be here.
The reason Nick is on the podcast today is he was the one that actually introduced me to the book The Shack about 10 years ago. What can you tell us about the book, The Shack?
Someone actually said The Shack will change the way you think about God forever. Mm. That's a bold claim, isn't it? But I think the book does, actually. I think it's a powerful book. The title, The Shack, it's actually a metaphor for the place where we hide our pain.
That's brilliant.
It's basically a story on the face of it of a family man who tragically loses his 5-year-old daughter to a sort of child killer that's on the loose. Mm-hmm. And 4 years later, after this terrible event, he gets a note, which is supposed to be from God, inviting him to go to the shack where the body of his daughter was, well, evidence of a death was found. And he goes to this shack and has an encounter with God, or the Trinity, if you like, and finds some healing. It's a story about grace, kindness and forgiveness.
I find myself wondering what is in the mind of somebody who could write a story about that. So what can you tell us about the author, William Paul Young?
The chap himself, Paul Young, was son of missionary parents who took him out as a baby, I think, out to New Guinea, and he was raised with a tribe. He was the only white boy in this tribe for the first few years of his life, and then was sent off to boarding school. All sorts of issues and problems about the main feature that he was abused as a boy systematically, both by tribe members and by older boys at the boarding school. Interestingly enough, this all started about the age of 5, which is the age the daughter Missy is in the book, where she gets killed.
Gosh.
Someone actually wrote to Paul Young and said, Missy, that's the girl who gets killed in the story, she represents something murdered in you as a child. And Mackenzie, the father, represents you as an adult trying to deal with that. And when he was told that, he said, you've hit the nail on the head.
That's the fascinating thing about sort of creating things. Often people can see something in your own work that you can't see yourself.
Yeah, he's a deep thinker, a theological thinker, but more than that, someone who is aware that we can have a shack that's, if I like, our heart that has, we paint a facade over it, but underneath it hurts and it's painful. And he experienced that in his own life in various ways, became a broken man and needed God to come and heal him. He actually felt that his background, his religious background, didn't really help particularly, but in some ways made him want to pretend even more that everything was okay when it wasn't okay. And he needed a breakthrough to actually discover who God was for himself, rather than just go some religious ceremonies and so on.
That's fantastic. So what was the reaction to The Shack like in the evangelical Christian community? I mean, I sound terrible. I feel like such a fake saying the evangelical Christian community. What I mean is, how did it go down in church? But I'm well aware that from our sort of atheist listeners, that church has a very broad meaning.
Yeah, I think this is an excellent book for atheists, by the way, an excellent book. The reaction was, I would say, mixed and strong. Yeah. I was reading how at one particular event, there were folk with placards outside picketing an event where the book was being promoted. Gosh. And William Paul Young actually spoke to some of the protesters. It turned out they hadn't actually read the book. So a lot of people were protesting on the basis of what they'd heard rather than reading it for themselves. And the answer is always to read something for yourself, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But the various criticisms, the main criticism revolved around portrayal of the Trinity, God, Father, Son, and Spirit. And in particular, the fact that God was represented initially as a black woman. Mm-hmm. And many traditional evangelicals couldn't cope with this and didn't really ask the question, why did God appear as a black woman? And what did it reveal about the heart of God and so on? So people didn't see beyond the simple illustration. So there's controversy about portrayal of the Trinity, particularly God as a black woman. Mm-hmm. There's no mention of God's justice or wrath. That's caused some controversy. But I think the main criticisms I heard revolved around the portrayal of God as a woman. People couldn't cope with that. So some strong reactions, very positive reactions as well, I have to say, with some folk. But a lot of people did get hot under the collar about it.
It's one of those books where I can remember where I was when I was reading it. It was had that much of an impact on me.
Yeah. The tricky thing is, on the basis of the story itself, having your 5-year-old child murdered and having to come to terms with that and be able to get to a point where you can forgive and move on, that is incredibly powerful. And that is, to actually deal with that was very brave, I think. You can look at it as a metaphor, but just the story itself is very, very powerful.
So I remember when he's trying to talk to God about finding the man, he said, well, that man's my son too.
Yes. Yes, the implication was in the story that Mac, or the main character, ends up judging God.
Yeah, definitely.
How often do people do that?
All too often. Nick, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And
My pleasure as always.
it's always a joy to have you on.
Thank you.
Okay, Phil, that was Nick Matthews. What do you think?
He's like a font of knowledge, that man, and he's quite wise, especially in his choice of books, because obviously The Shack is, as I now know, is a very good book. I also quite liked how concise everything was. He managed to boil everything down into nice bite-sized chunks.
Yeah, Nick Matthews is wonderful. Nick Matthews is who I want to be if I grow up. We
don't know if that's going to happen though. So.
He's a passionate follower of Jesus and a massive geek. So we're both in the same Venn diagram on that one. So we're going to introduce a new topic for this one, a new section that hopefully we're never going to bring in again, and it's called Problems with the Film.
Dun 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 dun.
Not bad for off the top of your head there. I like it.
Thank you.
So, for this film, we are going to break one of our cardinal rules and discuss the quality of the film. We always say we're not here to critique the film, we're just here to find faith parallels. I felt it was important for this film to discuss some of those quality issues. My main issue is predominantly with the first 30 minutes of the film. You don't need them. There is no point in whatsoever.
And that's the end of that section, guys. End of podcast. Goodbye.
Get rid of that bit. You know that thing where people keep talking about how film is a visual medium? And I always feel the need to correct people and go, actually, film is an audio-visual medium because you kind of need both for it to work really well.
Yeah.
Clearly, the people who adapted this book have never heard of either of those phrases. Or they've never seen the theatrical cut of Blade Runner. Because
famously,
the voiceover with Tim McGraw talking in this like slightly Midwestern Southern accent when he talks about his friend Mac and how he's trying to sound vaguely inspirational.
Use Tim McGraw's shaving products. It's sort of like that.
The character that he plays is Willie, which is basically short for William Paul Young. So he's effectively playing the character. In the foreword to The Shack, there's a bit where the author talks about Mac as if he's a real person.
I had to do some Googling
to work out that it wasn't a real person.
Oh, so he's not real, right? Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So this is within an established literary tradition of I heard this story and this is what was told to me. The entirety of Frankenstein seems to go along that basis. If you took that narration out completely, you could still get everything that's happening there. You don't need to be told it. You don't need to be talked down to it.
You do sort of have to sort of spoon feed some bits of information, but usually visually, because some things just aren't obvious unless you literally know the character and wrote them.
There's other things in there. The representation in it is really bad up until he actually gets to the shack. Everybody there is, I'm going to call it aggressively white and sort of toned, and they all of the supporting characters all look like they've come out of central casting. I was a little thrown initially by the casting of Sam Worthington, because if the way Mac is described in the book, he's sort of middle-aged, he's balding, he's overweight, and Sam Worthington is weaponized handsome.
Man could walk into any shop and everybody would keel over pregnant. You know what I mean? Like, it's just ridiculous. Including the men.
Sam Worthington's hair is almost as good as mine. That's how good it is, And but that said, all my problems with the film dissipated when he actually got to the shack. When he actually gets there, when the story actually kicks in, it was brilliant. The problem is, if you have all the bad stuff right at the start of the film, then people are obviously going to be switching off straight away. Those things that bug me, like, did you notice what they wore for church?
Smart casual?
They were wearing suits and sort of ties and everything. So why are they dressing up for church? As if God is fussed about whether you're wearing a suit and tie. It bugs me out because it feels like it's trying to perpetuate this idea of Christianity equals respectability. And that's not what God wants. God wants like a come as you are kind of thing. Like, I don't care what you look like on the outside. just show up. That's all I care about.
If I ever become a Christian, I'm going to show up to church one day in my ducky swim shorts.
Like, general sort of dress code for church is, am I wearing pants? If the answer's yes, then you're probably okay.
Yeah.
That's the general gist. Like I say, when I look at a film like this, I find myself thinking, well, why is it like this? Is there any way it could have been made better? Or is there a reason why it is the way it is? And all I can get is like, you could have just cut a lot of stuff out and we would have figured it out as we went along. An audience will enjoy it more if they can find things out as they go along, rather than if they have it spoon-fed to them right at the start.
One of the purest pleasures from watching film is when something clicks in your head. Especially, and that usually takes paying attention to the whole film. But then you go, that was it. Now I understand why this happened, and there's something really nice about that.
All that said, I did kind of love this film. It was better than I remembered. We watched it this afternoon, and me and Claire both had tears streaming down our face at different points in it.
I personally had a little cry when he reconciled with his father. I was just like,
Yeah.
And when he got to meet Missy again in the book, I cried at that point.
Oh,
I was just like,
good Lord. And I tell you something, Octavia Spencer has got game, hasn't she?
Oh,
you
man,
know?
Octavia Spencer.
There's that moment.
She can just play it. She can Eddie Murphy any of my films. You know what I mean? Just play every character. I'd be fine with it.
There's that moment where she's talking about Jesus being on the cross and how he may have said that I abandoned him, but I never left him. And she shows him the scars on her wrists as well. Yeah. And you can see her eyes welling up, and I'm all of a sudden getting chills just thinking about it. You know,
you're just there like
it once.
She loves her son so much.
Yeah. Once it actually gets to the shack, once the story gets to do what it actually wants to do, it is phenomenal. You know, it is something else. Anyway, all that said, It is time for Finding the Faith in the Film.
Oh, it's a lot of fun.
Fantastic. First of all, can you remember what Octavia Spencer's papa first refers to herself as?
Illusia,
yeah.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
Weird one. The translation, or some translation of that, are loving mercy, which I thought was a really nice thing. Or the fact that the Holy Spirit is referred to Sarayu. It meant something like a gentle wind or something like that, I think. So, got a quick question for you then. Is it okay to think of God as a woman?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Because the way I see it is just that she comes in whatever form is easiest for the person she's trying to sort of converse with. It makes whatever makes sense to them. Basically, she comes in whatever form makes sense.
First of all, as we've discussed before, you can't actually see God, or your head will probably explode, or something like that. So it's already a narrative contrivance, but I'm here for it. So interestingly, I spent a bit of time looking at this. Obviously, in the Bible, there are lots of times where God is referred to using male terminology. Obviously, Mark 14, I think 36, Jesus refers to him as Abba, which is Father. Yeah. In some Old Testament things, it's Melech, which is usually translated as king or lord or captain, ruler, prince, chief.
I like the idea heavily of Captain God.
Captain
just
God.
On a big ship. You know, just like, yar! Convert those people.
Yeah, that's basically it. You know?
That's it.
However, what's interesting is there are times where in the Bible, God is referred to using female terminology. In Matthew 23:37, he's referred to as, or he's illustrated as being a mother hen. In Isaiah 49, verse 15, there's a line where it says, "Can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she has born? Though she may forget, I will not forget you." And then Jesus also gives a parable in Luke 15, 8-10. Have you ever heard this parable of the woman looking for a lost coin?
No.
So it's basically similar to the shepherd losing the one sheep and leaving the 99 to go find it. She loses a coin.
No, I have heard of that. Yeah, I didn't know it was. I didn't know it. The title
sweeps that. Yeah, so sweeps the house, looks for it, and then when she finds it, she sort of brings all her friends over to celebrate. Look, I found this thing. We've got God being presented in male imagery and also female imagery as well. So, why on earth does it seem so important to refer to God by a gender?
That is a good one because,
yeah.
it doesn't really make sense to gender God, because God isn't human.
Absolutely,
it just is.
Well, both genders came from God, so that's an important thing to remember. So, first of all, because pronouns are useful, and also because patriarchy.
Yeah, unfortunately, patriarchy does have a steely grasp on all of our society, even when it comes down to religion as well. Which, well, we're still working through it, everyone.
Absolutely. So I looked into this a bit more. Found Elaine Storkey, who is a philosopher, sociologist, and theologian. So she was the co-author of a book called Conversations of Christian Feminism. She says that by limiting ourselves to male-only language, we restrict our capacity to see God in all his fullness. Do you remember when we talked about the Arrival episode about Sapir-Whorf, about how language affects your perception of things?
Yeah.
So this is a similar thing. If you only ever use male terms to think about God, then it's going to impact on your ability to how you see God. She also says, I would simply say that God is always bigger than our language, and the Bible itself gives us permission to address God using many metaphors. Some of the metaphors are inevitably gendered, but any single one only ever gives us a glimpse of the breadth and majesty of God. Insisting on all male metaphors is not only seriously limiting our understanding of God, it repudiates biblical practice. And why do it? Because feminine concepts seem repugnant? Why? Of course we want to avoid any suggestion that we are worshipping a goddess, which is why I personally don't ever refer to God simply as she. But I do draw on the feminine images for God that are already given in strict scripture. So if you refer to God as a goddess, you're kind of making the same mistake. You're kind of limiting God to just one thing. Having the flexibility of language helps you to have a better understanding of God.
Like Max says in the book, like he says, like, I imagined you with a big white beard and to look a bit like Gandalf. And and I think that's how most people perceive it. But again, that comes back again to race as well, because Gandalf's a white man with a big white beard, but there's no say he was born in Israel.
It's funny you said about Gandalf, because in an interview with Nicky Gumbel, William Paul Young did actually say that most people think of God as looking like angry Gandalf.
Isn't that just Saruman?
Yeah.
It's basically just Saruman, right?
Nicely done. There is a line in there where when he talks about how you're not kind of what I expected, she says, after what you've been through, I didn't think you could handle a father right now. And this led me to this question: does our relationship with our human fathers impact on our relationship with God?
I guess in some ways it probably does. It, like the behaviour of your father towards you when you were younger, or maybe not even you're younger, but just in your formative years, whenever that took place, can be quite. It can craft a certain perspective. Yeah. Like, for example, my dad's a staunch atheist, and he used to tell me that he didn't used to say, I don't believe in God. He says, God does not exist. And I came to my own sort of conclusion with that in the end. Like, I sort of was inclined to believe my dad because he's my dad. You know, you want to lean on your parents' wisdom and your parents' advice. But eventually I sort of just looked at it myself and just went, I'm not saying that God doesn't exist. I'm just saying that if he does exist, he's not for me. I lean more towards agnostic nowadays than atheism, which is a bit of a plot twist. So.
Don't tell me that, because now we're going to have to change the intro for every single episode.
I was like, that's all right. No, to be fair, what I believe in is that there are facts in life and things that you do socially that can bring about a feeling of God. I don't believe it's necessarily God, but I would very much like to be proven otherwise.
Yeah. This is going to be one of those times when we take advantage of the fact that none of my family actually listen to this podcast. But I do not have I don't have a relationship with my dad, and I haven't had a relationship with my dad for nearly 2 years now. And prior to that, I didn't have a great relationship with him anyway. I feel like in many ways I have never quite been good enough for him. My dad was very young when he had me. He was 23. And I think that in many ways his idea of having a son would be that you had a clone. You had somebody who was like a little mini-me. And My dad is a nuclear engineer, rugby obsessed, status obsessed baby boomer, and I am not those things. And I think on some level, let's say from about 11 onwards, I knew I felt the need that I had to try and impress my dad. And it never seemed to work. I think on some level, I felt like some of that might have translated into my relationship with God, that I felt I probably spent a large part of my teens, definitely my 20s, thinking that I wasn't good enough for God and that I needed to be better, that I needed to do something or be something to make him love me. And it's not been until somewhere in my 30s that I've really come to the realization that I am enough and that God, so if this makes sense, God is still working on me, and yet he likes me just the way I am. You know, that Bridget Jones line of, I like you just the way you are. I think that's the sort of thing that God would say to me. So
I think that's good.
I tend to think
a
of
good
God,
stance to take, you know?
I tend to think of God in male terms for the reason that Mac in the story can't think of God in male terms. I think I need a father figure, and in the absence of an earthly one, a heavenly one will do, if that makes sense.
I totally get it. Like, you know, I may as well. I'll take the deity then.
A little bit, yeah. So anyway, moving on before this gets too maudlin. We've talked in the past about God having a sense of humour.
I think that definitely shows in this film.
It really does. And I think, and like there's that line after when God sort of changes from being Octavia Spencer to being Graham Greene, you know, this sort of like sort of middle-aged Native American man, where Mac says to him, "Are you messing with me?" And God responds, "Oh, always." You know, he's like, I firmly believe
without a hint of irony either.
Yeah,
like just
I firmly believe that God sometimes just messes with you just because he can. Like sometimes we as human beings will bite the inside of our own mouths. There is no evolutionary reason for doing that. If I had to attribute that to anything, I would say that's God going, "Ah!"
If that was the case, I would say it was definitely some other power, because I would never choose to bloody well do that. You know what I mean? So
yeah, there's this line in the book, and they lost it in the film, and it's a real shame because I thought it was fantastic. It's when Jesus and Mackenzie are sitting out on the dock, and the exchange goes something a little bit like this. Jesus? Yes, Mackenzie. I am surprised by one thing about you. Really? What? I guess I expected you to be more, humanly striking. Jesus chuckled. Humanly striking? You mean handsome? Now he was laughing. Well, I was trying to avoid that, but yes, somehow I thought you'd be the ideal man, you know, athletic and overwhelmingly good looking. It's my nose, isn't it? Mac didn't know what to say. Jesus laughed. I am Jewish, you know.
I do like that. I like the sense of humour that Jesus has, because it really perfectly illustrates that he is also fully human as well as being God.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that he's a little bit self-conscious about his nose. You know?
He's just there like, is it my nose?
Like I say, there's lots of stuff going on there, but I just found that line hilarious, you know?
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Did you notice when he's settling down to sleep in the shack, he opens a drawer in next to his bedside table, and do you see what's in there?
A Gideon's Bible.
A Gideon's Bible!
Like, in real life, you'd find that in a hotel.
Yeah.
And it just sort of shows that he's on a visit right now.
It was such a nice touch that God Almighty, rather than having some sacred text or some tome or something like that, he would just grab a Gideon's Bible, arguably the most ubiquitous Bible there is. It was almost like saying, you don't need to unlock some sacred text or anything. I'm right here. I'm just in this normal book that you can find
like
anywhere.
if you just need a quick refresher, you can read the Gideon's Bible.
Yeah,
it's good that.
He says, how come I feel more comfortable with you than with the others? And Jesus says, that's probably because I'm human. This comes back to something we talked about, that Jesus was fully man and fully God. He is both things.
That one really bakes my noodle. I just don't know how to explain that one.
Yeah. The crux of a lot of this thing was when Papa says to Mac, the real underlying flaw in your life is you don't think I'm good. This film, I don't think it necessarily answers that perfectly. I think it does better than most people in answering that particular problem. But essentially what we're saying here is, if God is real, then why does bad stuff happen? Being honest, I don't have answers that satisfy me fully yet. So I'm going to keep them to myself until I got something that...
I think it comes back again to like the idea of balance for me.
The question isn't really why does bad things happen, because if people have free will, then that means that people can do bad things, and people can do bad things to each other. In many ways, that's not the thing that bugs me. The thing that bugs me more is, if God is real, why do natural disasters happen? Because I haven't come up with a decent answer for those yet. That's what I'm getting at.
That's one of those things where I'm just like, that's a bit mean, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Did you notice anything interesting about when God is trying to get Mac to forgive his daughter's killer?
I'm not sure.
Well, there's an interesting thing where he's saying, I want you to send him to hell. I want him to be punished. I want him to... And he said, okay, well, do I then punish his father, who was the one that made him a monster in the first place? Yes, punish him. Okay. All right. Do I then punish the person who made... it goes on. But the line that got me was where he says, he's also my son. The person that did this terrible, horrible thing is my son as well. And it's like, so often, when people do things that are completely, absolutely, disgustingly evil, we want to throw them away. We want to lock them up and throw away the key and pretend they don't exist. To hell with them, right?
Yeah.
But the uncomfortable thing about forgiveness is you have to forgive people that don't deserve it. The thing is, nobody deserves forgiveness. Forgiveness is a gift.
Forgiveness isn't necessarily for the person that you are forgiving, it's for yourself. If you don't forgive, all you're doing is swallowing poison and hoping the other person dies.
Damn it, Phil, I hate it when you steal my lines. That was exactly the thing I was going to go with. Yeah. That is a well-known phrase. If I forgive somebody, it is not a reflection on them. It is a reflection on my need to be right with my Father, God. And if God says I have to forgive people, and if I am not forgiving them, then I am sinning against God. And this is one of the things I really, really struggle with.
Yeah.
It is something that God is working on me with. Everybody's got something.
Yeah.
Some people are dealing with a porn addiction. Some people are dealing with being alcoholic. I am learning that there are some fights I don't need to get into, and I am still learning to forgive the people that hurt me in various different contexts. That's my journey. That's the thing I'm working on.
Yeah.
And it leads on to the next thing that it talked about, where Mac is holding the ladybird, which is sort of almost represents the killer. So he says, I forgive you. He opens his hand and the ladybird flies away. And then he says, I'm still angry. And God says, of course you are. You might have to do it 1,000 times before it gets any easier. And this is something that I learned a long time ago, but I feel like I keep learning it, is that forgiveness is a dynamic process. In some cases, I forgive you, and then you're forgiven, and then we move on, boom. And then in other cases, you have to keep reminding yourself. It is something that it has to become reflexive. It's something you have to choose to do, and it's difficult. Like as we've talked about in the past, that God has the power to literally forget a bad thing if somebody says they're sorry about it. We don't have that.
I would give anything for that power sometimes.
Yeah. We're coming on to my last point here, which is talking about accusations of heresy. When I researched this film, I found no shortage of blogs and opinion pieces that were very quick to accuse it of heresy. One celebrity pastor, Mark Driscoll, formerly of Mars Hill Church, got over 3,000 views of accusing it of 4 separate different types of history. Apparently, he later revealed that he hadn't actually read the book when he reviewed it.
Obviously.
And fun fact for you, this is a quote from Mark Driscoll. I recently heard 2 guys in their 20s passionately arguing over which superhero is the best of all. I took the liberty of asking them if they were single. They were. Who saw that coming?
Is he just trying to get people to dislike him?
Yeah, I can only assume that's what he's trying to do. Fun fact, Mark Driscoll also had to resign from his church due to accusations of bullying and financial mismanagement, and then the church fell apart.
That says a lot, doesn't it?
So, here's the thing. Is the theology of the shack biblically sound? Who cares? Clearly, the people making these kind of claims are completely new to the realms of literary and cinematic criticism and are fundamentally ill-equipped to judge a piece of fiction. Saying the shack is heretical is the same as saying the stars in Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night are not scientifically accurate. It is like complaining that Picasso's Woman Wept is not photoreal. It is obviously not meant to be. I think in many ways it comes from a bit of a jealousy. People who write stories are always going to get more people responding to it than people who write long, lengthy, dry essays about theology. It's just the way it is.
It's art. Get over it.
Yeah. Damn it, Phil. I've written an entire paragraph on this issue and you've pretty much summed it up in one sentence.
I didn't mean to do that.
5 words. It's art. Get over it. Brilliant. I love it.
I quite like my distilled sort of explanation.
So, listen, just like in A Matter of Life and Death, Mac suffers a head injury, just like David Niven did in that film. So, if this massively offends you, just think of it as one man's hallucination. Good art and good stories can often inspire you to learn more about a subject. And if The Shack does that, then it's done its job.
Yeah. I mean, doing this podcast for me has made me, intrigued, I think is the term, with the way theology and sort of especially to do with Christianity and that works. And I, like I say, I don't necessarily believe in it, but at the same time, I just respect it because it means a lot to a lot of people. I can't reconcile in my head just saying to people, oh no, you shouldn't believe in that because it's made up, because I don't know for sure. So
does this story do a good job of showing a person healing from trauma? The honest answer is, I don't know. Phil, what do you think?
I think you could probably take the angle that it's good therapy for the character of Mac to be able to talk all of this out and to sort of work through his feelings and start to become more of a whole person again.
I feel like we're sitting in on someone's therapy session, and as with so many things, one person's therapy only needs to make sense to them. It only needs to help them to heal, and if it helps anybody else, that's great. The one thing I would say is that healing is almost always a long, drawn-out process. I wish I could get it done in a weekend. I've
get it on the NHS or something like that.
But all that said, I love this film. When he takes his daughter's body and it's put in the hand-carved coffin and he's still bursting into tears, it got me so hard. I think, not wishing to sound like a cliche, I think watching this film on the other side of parenthood has a different effect on you.
I kind of wish I'd seen it before I was a dad. Again, I think it's still just as enriching no matter what.
So there we go. That is our Finding the Faith in the Film for The Shack. We have... Can you believe we have now done 22 episodes of God in Film?
Yeah. Yes, I can, Giles. Yes, I can. It's there's been times when I've just been like, I'm very tired now. But I enjoy doing it. So what's tiredness?
So we have a review in from Becca, and she says, absolutely love this podcast. I had my face in my hands laughing for some of the Jane Eyre episodes. Really easy listening. I listen along while I'm working, as well as casually thought-provoking. On another note, Claire Goff has the most relaxing and kind voice. If I'm ever feeling anxious, calms me down. Keep making the great content, guys. Love it.
Thank you so much. That means everything. It really does.
So the last thing I want to say is, we love making this show, and we know from our download figures that you love it too. We just have one little request. If you like this show, please tell us about it. As you know, any creative types are desperate for some validation, and we don't ask for money, we don't run ads, we just want to know what you think. It makes our day. Also, as the realities of being a parent kick in, it would really help to justify to our wives why we spend so much time on this project.
You have no idea.
So if you could just leave us a review or tell anyone that you can, any way that you can, we would love that. If we do another series, it might be something a little bit different from the established God in Film format we've got, and if we do get to hear it, it will be later on in this year. In the meantime, Phil, have you enjoyed making this series?
Absolutely. What started off as a way to stop myself from just going completely insane in lockdown has turned into something that's generated a real interest in my life, and I think it's, I've taken some lessons from this that make me a better person and a better father and a better husband as well.
That is awesome. I did not intend for any of those things to happen, so I'm going to count those as a bonus.
I'm not going to lie to you, I wasn't expecting that myself, but even if you're not religious, I think you can learn a lot from religion.
Absolutely. Okay, listeners, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being with us. Phil, have you had a good time?
Every single time, mate.
Me too. Listeners, until next time, bye!
Bye!
God in Film is hosted and created by Giles Goff and Phil Coleman. Mixing by Phil, editing by Giles. Our logo was designed by Julie Walsh, and our theme tune was composed by Rick Lee. Fact-checking and waffle editing by Christina Stannard-Good. God in Film is a Dask production. Please rate and review. Unless it's a 1-star, in which case, hire a troupe of travelling players to perform The Murder of Gonzago at court. But insert a scene where 2 white dudes jabber on inanely about films, and then keenly watch my reaction as I walk off and go and cry in my room.